B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, July 11th, 2017. 7-11, your lucky numbers? Well, we've seen the first real evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian representatives. It comes in an email thread released today by Donald Trump Jr. Now, this email thread was a source of great speculative reporting that occurred yesterday, including the New York Times, which broke the story, and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And at that point, someone had read the emails to them, but the reporters at the Times had not actually laid hands on them. And apparently they got possession early today. They told Don Jr. that they were going to publish them, and instead of replying to the Times, he went to Twitter and he posted these emails. They are damaging. I don't know that they are conclusive. And last night, after breaking this news, Rachel Maddow declared game over. Well, I don't think so, and I'll explain why. Because there may be enough insulation from Trump Sr., or for Trump Sr., from these meetings that were held, at least one that we know of, and the damaging emails. And he may be able to say, I didn't know nothing about it. And it may actually be true, it may not. But deniability is something that is often built into top dogs in political operations. So that they can say, well, I didn't know anything. You know, it was just my boy was doing that. And we're going to hear the Watergate question echoing through the halls of Capitol Hill. What did Trump know, and when did he know it, if anything? So, as you know, I have remained skeptical of this narrative as it has been produced day after day based on anonymous leaks and nary a document that we can see for ourselves. That is changing. Now, I remain skeptical of the central original charges that Russia hacked the DNC, that Russia purloined John Podesta's emails, gave them to WikiLeaks as part of their sweeping campaign to favor Trump over Clinton. And there may be evidence that will support that. We still have not seen it. And I think it's important to note that Trump can jettison his son-in-law, the Crown Prince Jared Kushner, who was in this meeting for 10 minutes with the Russian lawyer. And he can distance himself from his son, who is not technically a part of the administration. And so using this to nail the president, leading to impeachment, that remains a long slog and a heavy lift. So this guy, Rob Goldstone, is a friend of Don Jr.'s. He was a tabloid journalist in Britain and a music promoter. He's got a client who's a Russian, whose name is Emin Agalarov. And he was the intermediary who sent these emails to Don Jr. requesting a meeting. And the original email, quote, says that the information came from the Prosecutor General of Russia, and it was an offer to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary Clinton and her dealings with Russia, and, quote, would be very useful to your father. And Don Jr. responds, if it's what you say, I love it. Now, it is against American law to accept information or other kinds of support from foreign entities for a congressional, Senate, or presidential election, federal races. And so on the face of it, it appears that Donald Trump Jr. is in trouble with the law, and he may have clearly broken that law. Now, what we don't know is if this explicit information referred to in the emails was ever delivered to the Trump campaign or an ally or an independent expenditure committee like Peter Smith's, We don't know. But the best I think Don Jr. can muster at this point was, I wanted to collude with Russia, but this woman came empty-handed, and she didn't give me anything that I could use. Is that a crime? Is his intention a crime? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if it can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are many things we don't know that may or may not be clarified over time. One lawyer contacted by the Washington Post, Larry Noble of the Campaign Legal Center, said, I think there's no question he was an agent of the campaign. He was holding himself out as representing the campaign. He was speaking on behalf of the campaign. It'd be hard for them to argue he wasn't acting as an agent of the campaign, that he was acting independently, particularly because he brought in other people from the campaign to that meeting, notably manager Paul Manafort and his brother-in-law, Jared Kushner. So this is a major break. This is the kind of evidence that I have been demanding. This is the kind of proof that we have not seen up until this point. We clearly need a deeper investigation. The Mueller investigation, unfortunately, is the most credible one, and it will go on and on and on. And I know many people just want to snap their fingers and say, okay, this does it. As Maddow said, game over. But it's not that simple. And Trump will cling on to power, I think, for, well, as long as he possibly can. So let's take a look here at the emails. I have linked to them in the show file for today's podcast, and you can examine them for yourselves. I think the interesting portions are the original note from Goldstone, which explicitly stated that the source of the information was a prosecutor in Russia. They go back and forth trying to set up this meeting. It gets shifted from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., and Don Jr. sends a note to Jared and to Manafort telling them that. The email is, the subject line says, that it's R.E. Russia-Clinton, private and confidential. Now, we don't know how much Don Jr. shared with his brother-in-law and Manafort the information that Goldstone shared with him. And to me, what this exposes is political amateurs who are deeply arrogant. They believe they can do anything they want, can get away with it, and they're unschooled. These guys had never worked on a political campaign before, and they figured that, hey, anything will work. And in Trump's universe, there aren't any guidelines or rules. It's just whatever it takes. What remains to be seen is how close all of this can be linked to the president himself. And when we look at some of the arguments that are being raised about the culpability of Trump Jr., he eagerly accepted proffered help from a foreign government trying to help his father win the U.S. election. At minimum, we now know the Trump campaign was willing to collude with the Russian government. So these are very damaging disclosures and developments, and they come with actual evidence. That's an improvement. We're starting to get somewhere here. And Bob Perry at consortiumnews.com offers the cautionary note. No one seems to remember that Hillary Clinton supporters paid large sums of money, reportedly about $1 million, to have former British spy Christopher Steele use his Russian connections to dig up dirt on Trump inside Russia, resulting in a salacious dossier that Clinton backers eagerly hawked to the news media. So they paid a foreign agent to gather information in Russia. Perry continues, Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russian lawyer and the Clinton camp's commissioning of Steele's Russia dossier both occurred in June 2016. So you might have thought it would be a journalistic imperative to incorporate a reference or two to the dossier. He's referring to the New York Times coverage of its recent disclosures. And then Perry, at his best, reminds us of how George H.W. Bush tried to slime Bill Clinton in 1992 by having State Department officials rifle through the passport files of Clinton and his mother? And that's not the only time opposition research has been used in a nefarious manner or has been acquired in a nefarious manner. And Perry quotes a column he wrote on March 29th. An irony of the escalating hysteria about the Trump camp's contacts with Russians is that one presidential campaign in 2016 did exploit political dirt that supposedly came from the Kremlin and other Russian sources. Friends of that political campaign paid for this anonymous hearsay material, shared it with American journalists, and urged them to publish it to gain an electoral advantage. But this campaign was not Donald Trump's. It was Hillary Clinton's. Today, I'm releasing a new in-depth interview to my subscribers with David Cobb, a man I've been talking to on and off for years. He's a visionary and a very inspiring man. He was the Green Party's presidential candidate in 2004 and helped us with the post-election investigation that proved that Bush stole that election in Ohio in 2004. And last year, he was the campaign manager for Jill Stein's Green Party run. And he details in our conversation what he learned in the post-election recounts that were attempted by Jill Stein in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And here's an excerpt from that conversation where Cobb talks about the manipulation of our election by domestic players, not Russians.
One thing that we do know is that the election system in the United States of America is profoundly susceptible to attacks, to manipulation, and it does, in fact, start before the first vote is cast. I believe that you were absolutely correct to lift up interstate cross-check because it literally is an effort to ensure to purge from the rolls not merely folks who should not be on the rolls. No. It is literally an effort to purge poor people and people of color from the rolls, people who historically vote against corporate interest. That is, again, objectively true. The information is there. All one has to do is do internet search on interstate cross-check or the Jill Stein for President website, where we went through in excruciating detail just how horrific interstate cross-check is, specifically as it relates, again, to poor people and people of color. In addition to that, I want to talk about the fact that the U.S. election system and the campaign financing that is associated with it has literally legalized bribery in this country. We have literally turned our elections into auctions. And this was even before the Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission case. It was horrible. But now it's profane. I mean, I almost don't even have the language to describe how angry and outraged I am about the fact that through independent expenditures, billionaires can literally spend unlimited amounts of money to completely control the narrative. And it doesn't even end with campaign finance, as horrific as that is. Let's also acknowledge, Peter B., that we have a voting system that forces voters to vote against the candidates that they hate rather than for the ones that they want.
You can hear the full interview with David Cobb. It'll be released later today to my subscribers at peterbcollins.com and most of our online outlets. And it runs over an hour. He's got a lot to say. In the second portion, he talks about these movement workshops that he's conducting across the country to support activists, progressives, revolutionaries. And I hope you will check it out. He's a brilliant guy who I deeply admire. One of the things I talked to David Cobb about, among a multitude, is Trump's inclination to privatize government operations. And the latest is a doozy. The plan is being floated to outsource the conduct of our war in Afghanistan to Eric Prince of Blackwater fame and Steven Feinberg, the billionaire financier who controls the giant military contractor DynCorp International. Now, I'm offended at the mere idea that we would use mercenaries to continue our losing war in Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. but to turn to Eric Prince, who had some secret meetings with Russians that we don't know the nature of before the election, and this billionaire Feinberg, is just the most disgusting kind of cronyism, war profiteering, amoral, you get the idea. At some point, I kind of run out of words. Some people are referring to this strategy as the Laos option, after America's shadowy involvement in Laos during the war in Vietnam back in the 1970s. Now, I hope this dies an early death. This trial balloon gets punctured and immediately plummets to the ground. But Steve Bannon is promoting it. He made General Mattis at the Pentagon review it over the weekend, and Mattis is described as politely declining. But it could come to fruition. Also, I want to recommend the New York Times did a deep dive today on the wrecking crew and the lobbyists who are colluding with the appointees of Trump at various cabinet agencies. And it's another doozy of cronyism, of, inappropriate relationships between companies and the agencies that are supposed to regulate them, the revolving door that brings industry people into government just long enough to deregulate and then return to the industries that they did those favors for. For example, the Interior Department won't release correspondence or calendars for meetings, but a review of the handwritten sign-in sheets for guests at the agency's Washington headquarters found that between February and May, at least 58 representatives of the oil and gas industry visited the Interior Department. EPA won't release information, and the beat goes on. I encourage you to take a look at that and keep an eye on the way these people will be using their perches in cabinet agencies to do favors for the industries where they used to work and where you can expect they will return in short order. Mitch McConnell has taken some heat. Even Trump told him to cut back the Senate's plan for a full month off in August. And he announced today that he will cut the recess in half. And, of course, he blamed Democrats for stalling the health care evisceration. Yeah. McConnell also went on record saying that the debt ceiling must be raised, and that will be a battle with his Tea Party extremists in his own caucus. Rexon Tillerson dropped into Doha, the capital of Qatar, and spent some time, got them to sign a memorandum of agreement that he is now going to take to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia to try to tamp down this spat between members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The Saudis, the Egyptians, the Bahrainis, and the UAEs, sorry about that, they basically want Qatar to shut down Al Jazeera. And Qatar has responded by saying, no way on that, but we will sign a public statement saying that we will fortify the fight against terrorism and actively address terrorism funding issues. Sounds completely meaningless to me. BuzzFeed reports that Pentagon officials they've contacted don't know diddly about the ceasefire that's now in its third day in Syria, and we're told that there may be some peace talks. But the ceasefire doesn't involve the Syrians. It is the U.S., Russia, and Jordan. And the coordination desk is set up in Amman, Jordan. And they appear to be agreeing not to run air sorties over an area where there isn't that much fighting going on and where there aren't any U.S.-backed forces to begin with. So this is for optics. But I'll say that, a day with fewer people killed in Syria can't be a bad thing. And it'll be interesting to see if the U.S. Pentagon really embraces this break in the action and allows the breathing space for any kind of political talks to take place. Now, it does appear that the Islamic State is on the run from Mosul, and they're on their heels in Raqqa. But that doesn't mean this is over. And let's assume that the Islamic State disappeared from Iraq and Syria tomorrow. What happens then? How do we deal with the Assad government in Damascus? What follows it? Who gets to decide? How will we handle the influence of Iran and the Turkish Kurds and the Syrian Kurds? This is a very complex and messy situation, and we have no public indication that Trump has a secret plan, like he said, to defeat the Islamic State, much less deal with the vacuum that will be left whenever the fighting stops in Syria and Iraq. Interesting statement from Betsy Reed, the editor-in-chief of The Intercept, published at their website today. This relates to the case that we've been talking about. Reality Winner was the NSA contract employee who secretly sent a document to The Intercept, and The Intercept's journalism craft led, we believe, to her arrest and imprisonment. She's facing charges under the Espionage Act. Now, The Intercept does admit to some unspecified errors, and they're putting up two $50,000 pledges to help with attorneys for Reality Winner. To me, that's an implicit statement of their failure to properly protect a whistleblower who provided them with a secret document. She writes, "We at The Intercept have always opposed the use of the Espionage Act against government whistleblowers. Our stand is unwavering. We would object to the prosecution of Winner under the Act even if we had no connection to the materials she is accused of disclosing. Of course, as the news outlet Winner is accused of leaking to, The Intercept has a unique perspective on her case and a passionate desire to see her receive a fair trial, even though we had no idea who our source was and still have no independent knowledge of the source's identity." That's bullshit. Matthew Cole contacted someone at the NSA to confirm that the document was real, and when he did, he gave them the evidence they needed to finger Reality Winner. And if you've heard the damaging, the blistering statements from both Joe Hickman and John Kiriakou in our recent in-depth interview, both of them burned by Matthew Cole, Kiriakou explicitly says, "I wouldn't have gone to jail if it weren't for Matthew Cole," and he says Cole was either a bumbling idiot or he ratted him out. This faux apology from The Intercept doesn't make any mention of the three reporters who bungled this investigative piece and left their source exposed. That's pretty sad. I want to commend the people at Ralph Nader's Public Citizen, because they helped prod the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is at risk of being eliminated under the Trump reforms of government. Well, the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has issued a final rule to restore my ability to join together in a class action lawsuit against banks and other financial institutions, and it also allows us to escape forced arbitration provisions in consumer contracts. And this is one of my pet peeves. I recently signed up with a financial advisor, and their standard contract included binding arbitration, and I said, look, this is a deal breaker. I will not sign this. Now, I'm not a frequent litigant. I don't intend to sue you ever, but I'm not going to give away my right to sue you before I've ever even done business with you. And so this is a true victory, and I'm glad to see it. Finally, tomorrow will be the first day of hearings for the Trump appointee to replace James Comey as FBI director. His name is Christopher Wray, W-R-A-Y, and he's an inside player, a Republican who was in the Justice Department under Attorney General Ashcroft. And one of the lines of questioning, if we have decent Democrats on the panel, will be about his silence when he worked at Justice, when John Yoo and his colleagues were writing the rationales, these phony legal pretexts to allow torture by redefining torture. And so I hope that he will also be called on to talk about the FBI's paid informant program aimed at Muslim communities, the frame-up of so-called domestic terrorism suspects, the abuse of national security letters by the FBI. And don't take my word, their inspectors general have reported this year after year after year. As you know, it wasn't just James Comey. I regard the FBI as a rogue agency going back decades. Bob Mueller now running the Trump-Russia Special Counsel Office. He's as tainted as Jim Comey is. And I don't expect Chris Wray to be much different. And I'm also disappointed because his name at least sounds the same as one of my favorite blues musicians, the Brit, whose name is Chris Rea, spelled R-E-A. Thanks for listening to my ranting and raving, my daily news and comment podcast. It's available on YouTube, and I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling